the strange, the bizarre, the unusual. I like it. Gospel of Judas, read by Roger Hanson. The Gospel of Judas. The Gospel of Judas is a Gnostic gospel whose content consists of conversations between the apostle Judas Iscariot and Jesus Christ. It is believed to have been written by Gnostic followers of Jesus rather than by Judas himself, and since it contains late 2nd century theology, probably dates from no earlier than the 2nd century. In 180 AD, Irenaeus, the bishop of Lyons, wrote a document in which he railed against the gospel, indicating the book was already in circulation. The only copy of the Gospel of Judas known to exist is a Coptic language text that has been carbon dated to AD 280, plus or minus 60 years. Joseph Barab presented the behind-the-scenes story of the role and analysis of the link played in authenticating the book at an American Chemical Society meeting. It has been suggested that the text derives from the earlier Greek version, A translation of the text was first published in early 2006 by the National Geographic Society. In contrast to the canonical Gospels, which paint Judas as a betrayer of Christ who delivered him up into the authorities for crucifixion in exchange for money, the Gospel of Judas portrays Judas's actions as done in obedience to instructions given by Christ. The document also suggests that Christ planned the course of the events which led to his death. This portrayal seems to conform to a notion current in some forms of Gnosticism, that the human form is a spiritual prison, that Judas thus served Christ by helping to release Christ's soul from its physical constraints, and that two kinds of human beings exist: the men furnished with the immortal soul, which is from the eternal realms, and will abide there always, the strong and holy generation, with no ruler over it, to whom Judas belongs, and the other ones, the majority of mankind, who are mortal and therefore unable to reach the salvation. The Gospel of Judas does not claim that the other disciples knew about Jesus' true teachings. On the contrary, it asserts that they had not learned the true gospel, which Jesus taught only to Judas Iscariot, the sole follower belonging to the holy generation among the disciples. A leather-bound Coptic language papyrus document that surfaced during the 1970s near Benu Masar, Egypt, was named the Codex Chacos, Tchacos, after an antiquities dealer, Frieda Nesberger, Chacos, who became concerned about the deterioration condition of the manuscript. First translated in the early 2000s, the Codex contained text that appears to be from the 2nd century AD and includes the self-titled Gospel of Judas. Eugenioin Laudus, which claims to be the story of Jesus' death from the viewpoint of Judas. The manuscript was radiocarbon dated between the 3rd and the 4th century, according to Timothy Joel, a carbon dating expert at the University of Arizona's Physics Center, and described by the National Geographic as being from AD 280, plus or minus 60 years. Today the manuscript is in over 1,000 pieces, with many sections missing due to poor handling and storage. Some passages are only scattered words, others contain many lines. According to Rodolphe Kasser, the Codex originally contained 31 pages, with writing on both sides. However, when it came to the market in 1999, only 13 pages remained. It is speculated that individual pages have been removed and sold. It has been speculated on the basis of textual analysis concerning features of dialect and Greek loanwords that the Coptic text contained in the Codex may be a translation from an older Greek manuscript dating, at the earliest, to approximately AD 130 to 180. Cited in support is the reference to the Gospel of Judas by the early Christian writer Irenaeus of Lyons, who, in arguing against Gnosticism, called the text a fictitious history. However, it is uncertain whether the text mentioned by Irenaeus is in fact the same text as the Coptic Gospel of Judas found in the Codex Chacos. However you spell that name. A.J. Levine, who was on the team of scholars responsible for unveiling the work, said that the Gospels of Judas contain no new historical information concerning Jesus or Judas, but that the text is helpful in reconstructing the history of Gnosticism, especially in the Coptic-speaking areas. The Gospel of Judas consists of 16 chapters which document Jesus' teachings about spiritual matters and cosmology. Judas is the only one of Jesus' disciples who accurately understands the words of his master. This Gospel contains few narrative elements. Essentially, the Gospel records how Judas was taught by Jesus the true meaning of his message and was then stoned to death by the other disciples. The Gospels contain ideas which contradict those circulating in the early Christian church. The author argues that God is essentially a luminous cloud of light who exists in an imperishable realm. Adamus, the spiritual father of all humanity, was created in God's image and dwelled in the imperishable realm. At the beginning of time, God created a group of angels and lower gods. 12 angels were willed to come into being to rule over chaos and the underworld. The angels of creation were tasked with creating a physical body for Adamus, which became known as the first man, Adam. Gradually, humanity began to forget its divine origins, and some of Adam's descendants, Cain and Abel, became embroiled in the world's first murder. Many humans came to think that the imperfect physical universe was the totality of creation, losing their knowledge of God in the imperishable realm. Jesus was sent as the Son of the God, not one of the lesser gods. His mission was to show that salvation lies in connecting with the God within the man. Through embracing the internal God, the man can then return to the imperishable realm. 11 of the disciples Jesus chose to spread his message misunderstood the central tenets of his teaching. They were obsessed with the physical world of the sense. They continued to practice religious animal sacrifice, which pleased the lower gods, but did not help to foster a connection with the true God. They wrongly taught that those martyred in the name of Christ would be bodily resurrected. In contrast, Jesus is able to teach Judas the true meaning of his life, ministry, and death. Mankind can be divided into 2 races or groups. Those who are furnished with the immortal soul, like Judas, can come to know the God within and enter the imperishable realm where they die. When they die. Those who belong to the same generation of the other 11 disciples cannot enter the realm of God and will die both spiritually and physically at the end of their lives. As practices that are intertwined with the physical world, animal sacrifice, and a common ceremony centered around cannibalism, the symbolic consumption of Jesus' flesh and blood, are condemned as abhorrent. Death is seen not as a glorious event, but simply as a way to escape the perishable realm of the flesh. Of crucial importance is the author's understanding of Jesus' death. The other Gospels argue that Jesus had to die in order to atone for the sins of humanity. The author of Judas claims this sort of substitutionary justice pleases the lower gods and angels. The true God is gracious and thus does not demand any sacrifice. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus' death is simply a final way for him to leave the realm of the flesh and return to the luminous cloud. The Gospel as a Gnostic text. Packles and King, 2007, argue that a more nuanced, contextualized understanding of alternative interpretations of the Christian tradition should inform discussions of Gnosticism. In the centuries following Jesus' death, many differing views of the meaning of his life and death existed. Nicene Christianity, i.e., a tradition based on the doctrine contained in the Nicene Creed, existed alongside other variants, one of which was labeled Gnosticism, for centuries. Gradually, the Nicene interpretation became the dominant mainstream version of Christianity. Before the discovery of the so-called Gnostic texts, such as the Nag Hammadi Library, scholars had to rely solely on the reports of Proto-Nicene Church Fathers for their understanding of alternative approaches to understanding Christianity. These reports were necessarily biased, since they were written by people trying to crush non-Nicene churches. Furthermore, study and analysis of original non-Nicene text has shown that the Church Fathers tended to oversimplify when writing about their doctrinal enemies. Access to texts such as the Gospel of Judas has allowed scholars to develop a much richer, more comprehensive understanding of non-Nicene movements. To blandly assert that the Gospel of Judas is a Gnostic text without qualifying this statement in some way does not do justice to the variety of sophistication of the heretical movements. The Gospel of Judas was condemned by Irenaeus in his anti-Gnostic works, Adversus Heresies against heresies, written in 180. Despite this attack, the Gospel of Judas differs from other non-Nicene Gospels in several ways. Far from arguing that the physical body is a prison which needs to be escaped from, the Gospel of Judas portrays Jesus as able to leave his body at will. In the text, Jesus is shown leaving his body, journeying to the imperishable realm and returning to his body. Unlike other non-Nicene Gospels, the Gospel of Judas is Scythian, because Scythian is a different meaning. It is Scythian in orientation, in that Adam's son Seth is seen as a spiritual ancestor. As in other Sethian documents, Jesus is equated with Seth. The first is Seth, who is called Christ. The initial translation of the Gospel of Judas was widely publicized, but simply confirmed the account that was written in Irenaeus and known Gnostic beliefs, leading some scholars to simply summarize the discovery as nothing new. However, it is argued that a closer reading of the existing text is presented in October 2006 shows that Judas may have been set up to actually betray Jesus out of wrath and anger. Truly I say to you, Judas, those who offer sacrifice to Sackless, the great fool, exemplify everything that is evil. But you will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me. Already your horn has been raised, your wrath has been kindled. your star has shone brightly, and your heart has been hardened. The initial translators might have been misled by Irenaeus's summary, which, although an exciting idea, was not necessarily accurate. Their theory is now in dispute. According to Elaine Pagels, Bible translators have mistranslated the Greek word for handling over to betrayal. Like many Gnostic works, the Gospel of Judas claims to be a secret account, specifically the secret account of the revelation that Jesus spoke in conversation with Judas Iscariot. Over the ages, many philosophers have contemplated the idea that Judas was required to have carried out his actions in order for Jesus to have died on the cross, and hence fulfill theological obligations. The Gospel of Judas, however, asserts clearly that Judas's actions was in obedience to a direct command of Jesus himself. The Gospel of Judas states that Jesus told Judas, "You shall be cursed for generations," and then added, "You will come to rule over them, and you will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Unlike the four canonical Gospels, which employ narrative accounts of the last years of the life of Jesus, in the case of John 3 years, and of his birth in the case of Luke and Matthew, the Judas Gospels takes the form of dialogues between Jesus and Judas, and Jesus and the 12 disciples, without being embedded in any narrative or worked into any overt philosophic or rhetoric context. Such dialogue gospels were popular during the early decades of Christianity, and indeed the four canonical Gospels are the only surviving Gospels in narrative form. The New Testament Apocrypha contains several examples of the dialogue form, for example being the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Like the canonical Gospels, the Gospels of Judas portrays the scribes as approaching Judas with the intention of arresting him, and Judas receives money from them after handing Jesus over to them. But unlike Judas in the canonical Gospels, who is portrayed as a villain, the excoriated by Jesus, alas, for that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for that man if he had never been born. Translated New English Bible, Mark 14:21, Matthew 26:24. The Judas Gospels portray Judas as a divinely appointed instrument of the grand and predetermined purpose. In the last days they will curse your ascent to the holy generation. Elsewhere in the manuscript, Jesus favors Judas above other disciples by saying, "Step away from the others, and I shall tell you the mysteries of the kingdom. And look, you have been told everything. Lift up your eyes and look at the cloud and the light within it and the stars surrounding it. The star that leads the way is your star." In the New Testament, Judas is said to have died by hanging himself, Matthew 27:3-10, or by bursting open after a fall, Acts 1:16-9. The Gospel of Judas does not specify the fate of Judas, although in the Gospel Judas tells Jesus he has had a vision where he is stoned to death by the 11 remaining apostles. The content of the Gospels have been unknown until a Coptic Gospel of Judas turned up on the Antiquities Grey Market in Geneva in May 1983, when it was found among a mixed group of Greek and Coptic manuscripts offered to Stephen Emil, a Yale PhD candidate, commissioned by Southern Methodist University to inspect manuscripts. How this manuscript Codex Chacos was found, maybe in the late 1970s, has not been clearly documented. However, it is believed that a now deceased Egyptian treasure hunter or prospector discovered the codex near El Minya, Egypt, in the neighborhood of the village Beni Masar, Benimasar, and sold it to one Hannah, Hanna, a dealer in antiquities resident in Cairo. In the 1970s, the manuscript and most of the dealer's other artifacts were stolen by a Greek trader named Nicholas Koutaloukis and smuggled into Geneva. Hannah, along with Swiss antiquity traders, paid Koutaloukis a sum rumored to be between $3 million to $10 million, recovered the manuscript and introduced it to experts who recognized its significance. During the following 2 decades, the manuscript was quietly offered to prospective buyers, but no major library or Egypt felt ready to purchase a manuscript that had such questionable provenance. In 2003, Michael Van Rijn, R-I-J-N, started to publish material about these dubious negotiations, and eventually the 62-page leather-bound codex was purchased by the Maecenas Maecenas Foundation in Basel. The previous owners now claimed that it had been uncovered at Mahafazat al-Minya in Egypt during the 1950s or 1960s, and that its significance had not been appreciated until recently. It is worth noting that various other locations have been alleged during previous negotiations. The existence of the text was made public by Rodolphe Kayser at a conference of Coptic specialists in Paris, July 2004. In a statement issued March 30th, 2005, a spokesman for the Maecenas Foundation announced plans for edited translations into English, French, German, and Polish once the fragile papyrus has undergone conservation by a team of specialists in Coptic history, to be led by a former professor at the University of Geneva, Rudolf Kasser, and that their work would be published in about a year. A.J. Tim Jewell, director of the National Science Foundation, Arizona AMS Laboratory, and Gregory Hodgins, assistant research scientist, announced that a radiocarbon dating procedure had dated 5 samples from the papyrus manuscript from 220 to 340 in January 2005 at the University of Arizona. This puts the Coptic manuscript in the 3rd or 4th centuries, a century earlier than had originally been thought from analysis of the script. In January 2006, Jean A. Ware of the Papyrological Imaging Lab of Brigham Young University conducted a multi-spectral imaging process on the text in Switzerland and confirmed their authenticity. Over the decades, the manuscript had been handled with less than sympathetic care. Some single pages may be loose on the antiquities market. One half page turned up in February 2006 in New York City. The text is now in over 1,000 pieces and fragments and is believed to be less than 3/4 complete. After concluding the research, everything will be returned to Egypt. The work belongs there and they will be conserved in the best way, Robert has stated. In April 2006, an Ohio bankruptcy lawyer claimed to possess several small brown bits of papyrus from the Gospel of Judas, but he refuses to have the fragments authenticated, and his claim is being viewed with skepticism by experts. Professor Kasser revealed a few details about the text in 2004. The Dutch paper Het Parool reported its language is the same Sahidic dialect of Coptic in which Coptic texts of the Nag Hammadi library are written. The Codex has 4 parts. The letter of Peter to Philip, already known from the Nag Hammadi library, the first Apocalypse of James, also known from the Nag Hammadi library, the first few pages of a work related to, but not the same as, the Nag Hammadi work, Elogenes, and the Gospel of Judas. Up to 1/3 of the Codex is currently illegible. A scientific paper was to be published in 2005 but was delayed. The completion of the restoration and translation was announced by the National Geographic Society at a news conference in Washington, D.C. on April 6, 2006, and the manuscript itself was unveiled then at the National Geographic Society headquarters, accompanied by a television special entitled The Gospel of Judas on April the 9th, 2006, which was aired on the National Geographic Channel. Terry Garcia, an executive vice president for mission programs of the National Geographic Society, asserted that the Codex is considered by scholars and scientists to be the most significant ancient non-biblical text to be found since the 1940s. However, James N. Robinson, one of America's leading experts on the ancient religious texts, predicted that the new book would offer no historical insights into the disciple who betrayed Jesus, since the 2nd century manuscript seems to derive from an older document. Robinson suggests that the text will provide insights into the religious situation during the 2nd century rather than into the biblical narrative itself. One scholar on the National Geographic Project believes the document shows that Judas was fooled into believing he was helping Jesus. Another scholar, April D. DeConnick, a professor of biblical studies at Rice University, reports in the New York Times that the National Geographic translation was critically faulty in many substantial respects, and that based on a corrected translation, Judas was actually a demon, truly betraying Jesus rather than following his orders. DeConnick, after retranslating the text, published the 13th Apostle, what the Gospel of Judas really says, to assert that Judas was not a daemon in the Greek sense, but that the universally accepted word for spirit is pneuma. In Gnostic literature, daemon is always taken to mean demon, as she wrote in presenting her conclusion in the New York Times. December the 1st, 2007. Judas is not set apart from the holy generation, as the National Geographic translation says, DeConnick asserted. He is separated from it, a negative that was dropped from the crucial sentencing. A negative that was dropped from the crucial sentence. An error National Geographic admits. Changes the import. They were genuine errors, or was something more deliberate going on? DeConnick asked in an op-ed page of the Times. The National Geographic Society responded that virtually all issues April D. DeConnick raises about translation choices are addressed in footnotes in both the popular and critical editions. Andre Gagné, professor at Concordia University in Montreal, also questioned how the experts of the National Geographic Society, NGS, understood the role of Judas Iscariot in the Gospel of Judas. His argument rests on the translation of the Greco-Coptic term apophasis as denial. According to Gagné, the opening line of the Judas Gospel should not be translated as the secret word of declaration by which Jesus spoke in conversation with Judas Iscariot, but rather as the secret word of the denial by which Jesus spoke in conversation with Judas Iscariot. Gospel of Judas 33:1. Gagné's conclusion is that this gospel is the story of the denial of true salvation for Judas. An alternative possibility that this Gnostic tractate is a description of a transmutation of the inner Judas into the form of his mystic master, Jesus Christ, is detailed in a book by author Robert Waller. The Bible says Saviors of Badia 1:21. Judas is not Judas Iscariot, who is fictional, but Jesus's brother James, the just, the successor to Jesus in all period church sources. All four canonical Gospels have indications that the betrayal scenario is a reversed or inverted record of the transfer of mastership from Jesus to James, such as the infamous kiss, paralleled in the Gnostic first and second apocalypses of James, and the bread being passed to James in the now lost gospel according to the Hebrews. Matthew has Judas appear immediately after Jesus announces that not their deliverer, CYLT version, not betrayer, GR, paradotomy, is at hand, 26:46. The young man in Mark 14:51 through 52, fling naked, up spiritually naked, as in the Gospel of Philip, is also linen-clad Nazarite James, following, succeeding, or supplanting Jesus. Psalm 41:9, BRB, John 13:18. Jesus, who isn't yet ready to take over his duties as Savior from him. The cutting off of the servant's right ear is allusion to mystic initiation into the mystery of the Word, the apophasis logos, heard in meditation. Matthew 26:40, with the right ear, in reference to other passages such as the sword from Jesus' mouth in Revelation. From Jesus' mouth in Revelation. The Gospel of Judas can be seen as a description of the process of James becoming a spiritual master to carry on the role of Jesus with new disciples, whom Judas will rule over as the daemon spirit of the 13th eon, P46. The famous statement of Jesus in the Judas Gospels, the good news of Judas: "You will exceed them all, for you will sacrifice the man who bears me, page 57. Is James merging into Jesus' form? Also John 13:19. I am he, and now is the Son of Man, James, glorified, John 13:31. That is why he is told, page 56, that no hand of a mortal human will sin against me, when Jesus tells him about what is to befall him when tomorrow they will torment the man who bears me. He gets stoned to death later, as Judas was dreaming in an earlier section. Judas is the new master, then ascends into the luminous cloud with Jesus and stops, gazing at Jesus as they merge into the light of the Father. One thing April de Cornick was right about in her descent above is that Judas' star has ascended in triumph, not passed by, 56:23. He is the new master whose horn has been raised, announcing his coming, 56:21. Whose wrath has been kindled against Saklos, 56:22. And whose heart has become strong, 56:24. Several features of Judas tally with Sant Mat teachings in Sarbacane, which notably the incipits, apophasis, logos as shabd or Christian word, and not the consensus secret account of the revelation. Introduction, Sarbacane. and the region never called by any name at page 47 in Judas as Anami Desh, the no-name region abode of God in St. Matt Cosmology, page 27, Sarbacane. The five combatants, page 55, or five kings, page 57, causing trouble in the Judas Gospel, have counterparts as lust, anger, greed, attachment, and vanity in St. Matt, and also, notably, as the five kings slain without mercy by Joshua in his devotions in Joshua 10:22 through 27. This raises profound questions about the validity of Orthodox Christian teachings, with an obvious mistranslation of paradiddomai, Paradidomai, as to betrayal, instead of the correct to deliver, as elsewhere in the Gospels, John 19:16, and the misinterpretation of someone from the oral tradition that mystics would say Jesus Christ almost certainly did say, "For you will sacrifice the man, Judas, who bears me, Jesus." Not knowing mysticism, the ones who heard these words in the first century didn't know what to make of them. So thus was born the Pauline Orthodox Gospel version of Judas as traitor on the now sacrificial Jesus. The payoff to Judas at page 58 appears as a sop to the canonical betrayal version, which was otherwise by then too well known for the canonical Gospels to leave out. What the scholars have not explained in the handing over version of the famous climax scene is why Jesus Christ would need any help turning himself into the authorities, or why the release of his soul required an execution, instead of not offering any historical insights, as one Orthodox researcher, Dr. James Robinson, has said. The Gospels of Judas may actually indicate just how the canonical betrayal story began. In 2006, Giza Vermes commented, "The Gospel was a typical product of Greek Platonic Christian speculation, representing Judas assisting the Jewish authorities' arrest of Jesus and bringing about his liberation from the prison of his body." In his 2006 Easter address, Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, strongly denied the historical credibility of the Gospel, saying, "This is a demonstrably late text which simply parallels a large number of quite well-known works from the more eccentric fringes of the early century church." He went on to suggest that the book publicly derives from an insatiable desire for conspiracy theories. We are instantly fascinated by this suggestion of conspiracies and cover-ups. This has been so much the stuff of our imagination these days that it is only natural, it seems, to expect it when we turn to ancient texts, especially biblical texts. We treat them as if they were unconvincing press releases from some official source whose intentions is to conceal the real story. And that real story waits for the intrepid investigator to uncover it and share it with the waiting world. Anything that looks like the official version is automatically suspect. Later the same year, biblical scholar Louis Panchard argued that the text suggests Judas was actually possessed by a demon. The president of the Maecenas Foundation, Mario Roberti, suggested the possibility that the Maecenas Foundation had acquired not the only extant copy of the Gospel, but rather the only known copy. Roberti went on to suggest that the Vatican probably had another copy locked away, saying, in those days the Church decided for political reasons to include the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible. The other Gospels were banned. It is highly logical that the Catholic Church would have kept a copy of the forbidden Gospels. Sadly, the Vatican does not want to clarify further. Their policy has been the same for years. No further comment. Roberti provided no evidence to suggest that the Vatican does, in fact, possess any additional copy. While the contents of one part of the Vatican Library have been catalogued and have been long available to researchers and scholars, the remainder of the library is, however, without a public catalog, and though researchers may view any work within, they must first name the text they require. A serious problem for those who do not know what is contained in the library. The Vatican, by word of Pope Benedict the 14th, grants the recently surfaced Judas Gospels no credit with regards to its apocryphal claims that Judas betrayed Jesus in compliance with the latter's own request. According to the Pope, Judas freely chose to betray Jesus, an open rejection of God's love. Judas, according to Pope Benedict the 14th, viewed, well, that's actually the 16th probably, I don't know, yeah, Benedict the 14th or the 16th, viewed Jesus in terms of power and success. His only interest lay in his power and success. There was no love involved. He was a greedy man. Money was more important than communing with Jesus. Money came before God and his love. According to the Pope, it was due to these traits that led Judas to turn liar, two-faced, indifference to the truth, losing any sense of God, turning hard, incapable of converting, of being the prodigal son, hence throwing away a spent existence. Spokespersons say the Vatican does not wish to suppress the Gospel of Judas. Rather, according to Monsignor Walton Brammull, President of the Vatican's Committee of Historical Science, we welcome the manuscript like we welcome the critical study of any text of ancient literature. Even more explicit, Father Thomas D. Williams, Dean of Theology at the Regina Apostolorum University in Rome, when asked, "Is it true that the Catholic Church has tried to cover up this text, Gospel of Judas, and other apocryphal texts?" answered as follows: These are myths circulated by Dan Brown, who recorded them purely as part of a fictional novel, and numerous conspiracy theorists. You can go to any Catholic bookstore and pick up a copy of the Gnostic Gospels. Christians may not believe them to be true, but there is no attempt to hide them. In AD 367, Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria did urge Christians to reject books called apocryphal. It is possible that in response to letters such as this one, some Christians destroyed or buried non-canonical Gospels. The strange, the bizarre, the unusual. I like it. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, share, make comments. We like feedback.